Welcome back, everybody, for the second episode of the OperaWire podcast. I'm David Salazar here with Francisco Salazar, who's not only my brother, but he's also the co-host and co-founder of OperaWire and this podcast. How are you doing?
How are you? Welcome back, guys. This is episode 2 of the OperaWire podcast. I'm Francisco Salazar, as Dave just introduced me. And I wanted to thank everyone for our first episode. It was quite actually well reviewed and well received.
Yeah, no, it was great. For us, it was like we mentioned last time, it was a long journey to get here. Obviously, there's a lot of questions around starting a new project, and obviously the consistency and the concerns around that. And there's a lot of great opera podcasts out there. So obviously, we wanted to figure out how we were going to bring ourselves into this medium, expanding what we've already created. And so, as we explore this, we're really grateful for everyone that's tuning in for the first time, who's tuning it back again for the second time. We're going to do something a little different. Last time, we kind of spent all of our time talking about one specific topic. Here, we're going to kind of hit a central topic for the show, where we're also going to hit some of the big news stories from the past month, basically. And then we're going to end the segment with something a little special that we're going to play around with. You guys will see it'll be a nice little treat. It'll be your opportunity to kind of get to know our experiences in opera in a little bit different way. So yeah, let's talk about it. It's been a wild month. I want to just throw out just a few things. It's still busy opera season. We've had a couple of writers, not a couple, several writers out there covering major festivals. We had Joao Copertino covering the Aix-en-Provence Festival. We had Zenaida de Obris, who was at the Baltic Opera Festival. We have Ellen Nielsen, who's traveling around Europe, covering a whole slew of different festivals in different countries. And that's just three of many other writers. So there's a lot of, for everyone that's interested in seeing what's going on in the opera world, it's been going on. What are the reviews? What are the festivals? We had an amazing piece by AJ Goldman recently about Don Giovanni Productions
One.
2 festivals. So it's been busy. It's been busy, but there's been some news stories that have been particularly interesting to talk about.
Yeah, it's been very busy. I mean, I know for one, I've been tuning into a lot of the broadcasts and the streams in Europe. I mean, I saw the Teatro La Scala's new production of Norma, and what amazing voices. Production wasn't so something I was really interested in about. I saw The Queen of Spades from the Vienna State Opera, which I was very excited about. It was obviously the role debut of Anna Netrebko as Lisa, and wow, what a production, what amazing voices, a really great cast. I think it's a really standout. And of course, I also saw the Arena di Verona's new production of Nabucco, which was broadcast on Rai 3. And again, really great voices. But wow, this production caused quite a controversy around the world.
It's
Was
not only
really
this
interesting.
production, though, is it? It's not this production because
No,
it's
it's
it's a
not.
sequel.
It's the sequel production because I actually got to see Stefano Polla's 2023 production of Aida in 2023. It was quite an experience. I remember that I was really excited, and all of a sudden it was about to storm, and they brought us. Told everyone to go in and take cover because it was starting to storm. The orchestra went inside, obviously, because the these are really expensive instruments. And then, of course, it started storming, and we saw this thunder from afar away. We all went inside. 15,000 people. I think it's 20,000 that night. It was a big gala event, and all of a sudden, 10 minutes later, the rain stops. The performance starts late at 9:30, and it all goes great. But as we're watching the performance, there's literally thunder from afar of the performance. It was such a wild evening. And it was a really interesting production, but I must say, it was not a production that I completely was in love with. And it seems like the chorus and some of the cast members were not in love with either, from what I understand. From the reports as well, due to the fact that there was heavy costumes and apparently people were fainting on stage.
But there was a recent report from Italian newspapers in which they spoke to chorus members, they spoke to participants of the production, and many went on record, obviously anonymously, but stating that the costumes are made out of plastic.
Mhm.
And in this extreme heat of the Italian summer, you know, yeah, it's very, not only is it heavy, but it's obviously attracting a lot of heat and it's causing them a lot of difficulty. It's not sanitary, it's not healthy.
Yeah.
And this was the issue with Aida. And apparently this was brought up to Stefano Pola, the director,
Hmm.
for when he was picked to do the Nabucco. And apparently, I can't speak for Stefano Pola. I don't know him. I've never talked to him. I've never heard his take on this. But apparently, that fell on deaf ears because fast forward to this season, the Nabucco production once again is employing heavy plastic costumes, which is putting chorus members again in danger because people have been fainting on stage. People have been needing medical attention. It's
Hmm.
been a very hot summer, so it's very concerning. It also, I mean, I always question the people at the top. How are you sanctioning this? How are you allowing for, if you already had the situation with a previous production from the same artist, and there's been concerns and they've been brought to your attention, how are you allowing that person? I mean, you're at the end of the day, you're the one dishing out the money. And from what I
Right.
understand, Arena Verona is very generous with their artists. So if that's the case, how are you allowing this to happen again? Potentially putting your chorus members at stage for art. You know, again, everyone has a right to expression. Art is important. It's important that as artists, we are able to express ourselves and allow our visions to come to reality. But also, I think there needs to be there's a line that can't be crossed, and
Right.
that line is human dignity and safety. And it seems like that's not being respected here. And quite frankly, I mean, we're not going to get into other topics that are happening, but there seems to be a lot of discourse around opera directors specifically who don't seem to take into consideration that the people that are directing on stage have are singers, and that requires a certain physical challenge that don't doesn't happen with films, that doesn't happen with theater. And in the case of the Arena Verona, it's an open air theater.
And it's
And
really hot. It's very hot during the summer. I remember being there and I remember how humid it was. I mean, we're all like there to sit. We're not doing the heavy lifting. These are what the
yeah.
singers are doing. The singers are literally moving about the stage. And I mean, I could tell you that this Nabucco production, from what I saw from the video recording and from the Aida recording, it it is a challenging production because you have to move around the stage in a very it's a very interesting direction. There's a lot of people on stage, so of course all the humidity,
The
it
body
just
heat,
the
yeah.
body heat, of course, it must be ridiculous. And I'll never forget I've seen some of like videos of people like talking about how hot it is in Verona and how these heavy costumes have to be put on. I mean, obviously they're representing an opera, obviously they're representing a staging, but I have always questioned like how do singers perform in some of these extreme conditions with these really heavy costumes, and not not faint or have a medical condition. I mean, props to them, but not everyone can resist that. So I think it's really important that when people are staging a production, that there needs to be some idea of how many people are on stage, what you're staging, and how it is, so that it's not dangerous, and so it's not something that could potentially be something that where you're going to go to the emergency room or to the hospital because it's something dangerous.
I mean, I ask myself because Irene Verona does repeat a lot of these productions.
Yeah,
Aida gets played a lot because it's a big piece.
yeah.
It's a popular piece. People that go to Arena Verona, a lot of them are tourists and they want to see the hits, and that's what Verona generally plays. So for them to put an Aida production that creates these kinds of issues, health issues, it is kind of it is fascinating to me. And maybe with Aida, you couldn't know because this is the first time they're doing something like this, so you couldn't know. But obviously, if you have to replicate it, you have to have those concerns. But when you go to something like Nabucco, where you already have the test case of Aida and you're investing money, you're putting money into something, it does make you question like who's who's in charge and where's their mind at? Because it
Well,
does seem very irresponsible.
it's fascinating because when I saw the pictures of Anna Pirozzi and Maria Jose Siri's costumes, they were one thing, but when Netrebko came to perform the production, it was a completely new costume set. And even the last costume felt a lot more flowy, and from the pictures, it looked like it was much lighter than the ones that Pirozzi and CD are wearing. So it's also really interesting that that was done. I don't know if it was done out of concern for the heat or it was or done because, well, that's just what she requested. I don't
Well, but
know.
if
It's
but again, if
interesting.
that's if you're allowing one artist to get an adjustment, right? Because let's just hypothetically, she goes in and she's, we've seen other productions with a star like Anna Netrebko who goes in and she gets a different costume from what was previously established. Fine, that happens. And then maybe that's an exception you make for that kind of singer. But at the same time, if you can do it for one, you can do it for many. I know it's expensive. I'm not the one that's managing these things, but at the same time, it is kind of a situation where you have to question um where the priorities are. I do find this, reading the story, writing this story, seeing the article, it was kind of it was a little bit of a slap in the face, to be honest. And it's not something, I mean, in a way it's shocking, but at the same time, you and I have been working in this industry long
Yeah.
enough, and I've heard enough stories from people, often off the record, about very complicated situations where stage directors, have a vision, but it's not practical for opera singers because many of them come from backgrounds like theater or musical theater or cinema. And
And
in those,
we've heard where some artists just decide to cancel the production. They can't they don't want to be part of it because they don't feel like it really, they can really understand the vision, or they just don't feel comfortable with the
yeah.
production. And I think that that's also something reasonable for an artist. If they don't feel comfortable with the production, they shouldn't have to be performing in that production. And that doesn't mean that they should get fired. It means
But
that
then
they
again, if you're in the chorus of the Arena de Verona
right.
and this is your job, what are you supposed to do?
No, of
What are you
course. I
supposed to do?
mean,
Like we can talk about like the soloists and the top singers and them maybe having the liberty of choice, but a lot of these people that are part of the chorus, are part of like these ensembles. What are they supposed to do? So
well,
they're the ones that are being trampled on. That because again, the article doesn't specifically state, the reports don't state anything about principal singer necessarily, even though they also seem to have to wear costumes that are very questionable in their nature.
well,
But it's
heavy.
it's the chorus members that are the ones that are, being trampled over. That's where the issue lies. That the chorus members are the ones that are going to having medical attention. So that's unfair. That's where I really have to question what, again, for me, artistic freedom, artistic expression, I think opera does need an amplification of vision and risk taking, but human dignity and safety is super important.
Yeah, no, I
Super
agree. I
important.
think that that's the most important thing. Safety first, and then we can talk about concepts. We can talk about everything. And I think directors uh, need to start thinking, and that's with everything. Houses and directors need to think first about their artists that are performing, and then they can think about, core. Then they can think about their concepts, because the concepts are great. And I mean, I saw this Aida production, and the pictures looked really fun and super galactic and really interesting. And then when you actually saw the production, I had some questions about why wasn't the lighting working to create that pyramid. It seemed like the concept was really interesting about this intergalactic space opera, but it just in the end didn't work. And it just seems that it also didn't work for the costumes, which, for what it's worth, maybe it's time to start thinking about a new director to come to the Arena di Verona, or maybe these concepts, because I've seen Stefano Polla's productions and they repeatedly have the same exact concept. Great. That's his signature.
I mean, maybe
That's
it's
the way.
practical inside a theater. Maybe he's just really,
Yeah,
maybe he's much better for something that's an indoor venue. Maybe for something where you don't have air conditioning or the ability to control the temperature and you're exposing artists to, heat waves. Maybe he's not the right guy for that.
maybe
Maybe his
that's
stuff
true.
might be better for some indoor stuff. And
Yeah,
that's okay, but again, I think it bears it definitely bears some thinking from the people at the top who are responsible for this.
yeah,
Speaking about people at the top and companies and decisions and challenges, another big news story that we came across this past week, actually two, but we're going to hit one in terms of financials, is the Detroit Opera announcing that they're canceling their opening production, well, their formerly opening production of
right.
La Fanciulla del West. They announced their season several months ago, and there have, I think it's 4 or 5 operas. Um, this was the only one that was a traditional like repertory staple. The rest of them are all rare works or contemporary pieces. Um, which is interesting that that's the direction that they're choosing to, that's where they're choosing to prioritize. Obviously, La Fanciulla is also it's not your typical repertory piece because it does get performed far less often than other Puccini operas. But what they, I mean, you have the article with you. I
I
think you
do.
have the specific reasoning, but basically what happened was they cited that they lost a ton of money.
More than $3 million in losses from 2023 to 2024 due to a number of factors, biggest being a loss of $1.7 million in government grants. Public donations also fell by $145,000 during that time, and program revenue declined by 1.2 million, a 45% decrease in admission and performance fees. There was also a loss of $468,000 from the discontinuation of the Detroit Opera Ball and other ancillary venues. So there was a lot of loss of money. And what's really interesting about that is the loss of 1.7 million in government grants. And I
I mean,
think we
that's the one that really stood out to me because it's the largest amount.
right.
Eh, is that something new? We live in an era where the NEA, for those who don't know, the NEA
The
has
National Endowment
faced,
of the Arts.
yeah, National Endowment of the Arts has faced several threats from the current presidential administration,
Hmm.
that stated that basically the NEA needs to step in line and follow along with the priorities of this administration, which is to quote unquote celebrate the 250th anniversary of the United States.
Well, according to the NEA opted for fighting another day by submitting to a new requirement under Trump to remain a viable institution in the land. However, in order to fit in with Trump's criteria to celebrate the country's 250th anniversary, numerous organizations that had already been accepted for grants received emails that stripped them on their previously awarded financing. So, if you could elaborate on what this means.
So yeah, so basically a lot of organizations had applied for grants. They had been approved for grants. And then suddenly, since Trump took over the White House and basically established his mandate for the NEA, a lot of organizations received notifications that that previously approved money was going to be stripped from them. And I think we've been publishing a piece that kind of establishes a lot of the organizations that have lost some money. I think if you
Yeah.
could just list off a couple of them, just so our readers and listeners can contextualize.
I mean, yeah, some of them that lost were the Opera San Jose's production of Zorro. The Brooklyn Art Song Society was also stripped of its grant. Philadelphia Orchestra lost its funding for its Pride concert. But what was wonderful about that was that they actually got donors to contribute for the concert, so it actually happened. Opera on Tap also lost some money. Virginia Opera also lost $25,000 in grant for its Loving versus Virginia, which is a really prominent Supreme Court case in U.S. history, which allowed for interracial marriage. There's a wonderful movie that was also made of it about the event. And the Haymarket Opera Company, just to name a few, was also stripped of its grant.
Yeah, so there's been a lot of companies that have been losing their financial, and it seems that though they don't explicitly say in the report, the Detroit Opera was relying on some financial support from from federal funds, and here we are. They're having to cancel, their first production of the year. Obviously, it's great that they still have a bunch of other operas left this
Yeah.
season to fill in their season, and obviously with the direction that that company is going, which is much more focused on contemporary works and new works. They're very much a company focused on being the alternative to what other major opera companies in the United States have been positing or proposing. But again, this is you hate to hear these stories. I mean, we've been hearing it often also, like
Right.
Los Angeles Opera, I think earlier this year or maybe last year announced that they were not going to be doing Lincoln and the Bardo production, that was no
And
longer part
Cavalier
of
and
their
Clay,
plan.
they also canceled.
Right. So we're hearing constantly about companies having to kind of cancel projects because the funding isn't there. And
Right.
obviously the NEA situation is putting an even greater wrench into the possibilities for opera in this country. Again, what you said about Philadelphia Orchestra and that concert going forward, obviously it's great that there's the financial resources to keep that going. But
But
that's obviously
not everyone has that option, and not everyone will have that option. I mean, in a way, it's great if you can depend on more donors and less on government grants, because that means you have more freedom to be able to say or not say, no, present the works that you want to work, and you don't have to rely on governments telling you how you have to present them, particularly right now. But you still, but you know, look at Europe. Europe depends on a lot of government grants, and that's why they're able to do what they do. I mean, Vienna has a great season, and Munich and Germany's had, even though Germany's had a lot of issues as well, and of course the UK, we all know the Arts Council has been quite a mess,
It's
and
been under fire for a lot of issues that it's
yes,
been creating.
and of course forcing the English National Opera out of London. But you know, the U.S. that doesn't really rely on government grants. The NEA losing that is problematic for a lot of companies, particularly when
Especially like the more independent ones
yeah,
that,
exactly.
that a grant like that, a grant from the NEA can support a production,
Yeah.
and in some cases even longer seasons, right? Um,
Well, just think about how many people will lose their job if these productions don't go through. That's not only singers, that's also costume people and chorus members who no longer have that work for that month that they had, or all the behind the scenes. Those people now don't have work for a whole month because they don't have that production to work with. That means their salaries might get slashed because these are smaller companies. This is not the Metropolitan Opera, or that
which
does.
also receives NEA grants, by the
Yeah.
way,
Yeah, of
for
course.
certain productions. So it's
Yeah.
not like it's just affects the smaller companies. It affects everyone. This is the whole operatic ecosystem and beyond, because the
Right.
NEA
But
doesn't just
think of some of these smaller seasons that don't go from September to May, that they only have four productions, and they have like months intermarried. They have months of wait periods between productions. So this is not September through June like the Met, which only has February off. They basically have a whole season and shows
yeah.
mostly every single day. Detroit Opera or Houston Grand Opera or Florida Grand Opera, they don't have shows every single day from September to June. So that's less work for these people. So they have to look for work in another place. And let's face it, there's not enough companies in the States to give that work. And there's definitely also not enough money in the performing arts for artists. We know that artists, opera singers, and chorus members, it's a career that you're not making millions off of. This is not like you can just release a CD, have billions of streams or whatever, and make billions and millions of dollars. This doesn't happen.
So yeah, I mean that was a big piece from this week. Now shifting gears to something more positive, depending on your perspective of life. But there was a big controversy in Italy, and it revolved around a famous, notable, controversial Russian conductor. Take it away, friend.
Well, I would also go back to judgment here. Of course, back on July 3rd, Valery Gergiev was announced for a concert at the Reggia di Caserta in Italy. Um, I was kind of shocked that he was going to come back to Italy to perform a concert with the Mariinsky Theater when most Italian theaters have now banned artists who have been in favor of this war with Ukraine and who are pro-Putin. So throughout a whole 20 something days, there's been politicians back and forth talking about whether or not this is the freedom of expression, or this is a way of uniting cultures. And then there's of course a lot of politicians, and most politicians were against this concert,
The
which I just found.
perception, the perception of what it
Yeah,
represented, because I
yeah,
don't necessarily think they cared so much about that. Because I mean, obviously, when politicians get involved with a lot of these conversations,
yeah.
you look at the way that they talk about the situation, they talk about culture and blah, blah, blah. But a lot of them are really more about the perception of how him coming into Italy is because you didn't really hear that conversation from the organizers. Or I mean, I
No,
was when that news came out, my big question was, what was the rationale for this? Because Gergiev has been persona non grata since 2022 all around the world, except for maybe Iran, China, and
Oman.
Oman, right? And obviously Russia, where Putin decorated him with a whole bunch of major positions, et cetera, over the last couple of years, and made him his key ambassador, cultural ambassador, right? But in Europe, and obviously United States, he's not coming back.
No.
Um, he's been openly rejected, and so in this case what was fascinating was suddenly, and there is also supposedly rumors that he might be going to Spain in 2026 for some tour. We don't know, maybe this will have a huge impact. What the denouement of this situation might have a huge impact on
Right.
that situation, seeing how it worked out. But what fascinated me about the situation was I never saw anyone really coming out and saying like, "This is why we decided to do this." You
Well,
had
if you look at the
politicians.
statement when they canceled the concert, they had nothing to say. It was very clear that, they basically went based on all of these politicians and all of these things, that people were saying. The controversy, the protests. There was a protest in Caserta that happened a few days before the scheduled concert, and
But
they clearly.
couldn't they anticipate that something like this might happen? Again, that's where I come back to. I didn't see anywhere anyone saying this is why we're doing it. This is why it was a good idea.
Right.
No one said this is a good idea. This is why we should do it, except for one, blank statement, one politician claiming that we needed to mix cultures or whatever. But no one justified why this was allowed to happen, when this was planned. We don't really know a timeline of when, who the genius was that decided that this was going to be a good idea. It brought a lot of attention to Italy, but I don't know if this is the kind of attention that Italy was looking for, because, you know, they're the country that looks kind of questionable right now in all of this. None of the other countries have welcomed him back. And suddenly the Italians created a whole bunch of controversy among themselves, but also shined a poor spotlight on their country from the outside world.
Well, what's interesting is that, when back a few, I think it's last season, Ildar Abdratsakov was supposed to perform in a production of Attila and in a production of Don Carlo. And there was a big controversy over whether or not in Napoli, which is very close to Caserta, basically in the same area. And, he eventually got canceled. His contract got canceled. And there was a bunch of controversy over that. So I was kind of confused as to why anyone would schedule a concert with Valery Gergiev, knowing that Valery Gergiev has been supporting Putin over 10 years now. I mean, he's been Putin's friend for years. I mean, Abratsakov's relationship with Putin is a little bit more questionable because we didn't really understand his relationship until he endorsed him formally a few years ago. And
Until
then
he
you
was seen dancing with the Secretary of Defense.
Yes, exactly. So until we saw that, and we saw that he kept going back to Russia and canceled everything and still performed in Russia, then you really understood what his relationship was. But with Gergiev, I mean, there was no hidden secret. I mean, we're talking about 2014, and we're even talking about back in 2020 when there were protests during the Fliegende Hollander at the Metropolitan Opera, and protests in 2014 after the Crimea, of course. So this is not a surprise. This is not new. This was confusing in every way, shape, or form. And I'm utterly surprised that someone like the president of the Campania Regia region could even say something. He told the New York Times that dialogue between people can grow and the values of human solidarity can develop. We're talking about a war that's been going on for 10 years and a person who's actively supported this war for 10 years, let alone that companies supported him until 2022. That's also questionable, right?
Wait, hold on. When you say 10 years, what do you mean? Because
Well, the invasion of Crimea was in 2014, and he was already supporting. He was part of the signatures to invade Crimea. So this war didn't start in 2022. This started in 2014 when they invaded Crimea, and we saw that Valery Gergiev was part of those signatures to support the invasion of Crimea. So to tell me that it's okay for him to come back to Italy and perform after he was fired from the Teatro La Scala in 2022, was fired from Munich Orchestra, was fired from Rotterdam, was fired from Verbier, there's no change. He hasn't said anything. He's now the Bolshoi Theater's general manager. He's still with the Mariinsky Theater. He's basically the Minister of Culture in Russia. He's basically part of that government. So I thought this whole thing was quite, for me, disastrous and made no sense. It still makes no sense to me, and I'm glad that it was canceled. And
by the way, interesting about the cancellation, because the Violin Channel had it first,
yeah,
before anyone else. And then I've had it over the weekend. No one had said anything. They reported on it, and then a day, I think on Monday, when it was made
yeah,
official. So I just want to point out that the Violin Channel did have were the first ones to announce. No one else announced the cancellation except for them.
right.
Um, One famous soprano had very tasteful, choice words.
Oh yeah, I mean, Carita Matila took to X and she said, some people showed some backbone, not the Italian concert organizers, slimy Russian ass liquor, People with backbone won. And she added, Russians have no place on the world art stage as long as they continue attacking Ukraine. You know, Karita Matila, I will say, she has been the most consistent in this whole thing. And I love the way that she's just been on this whole topic. I think it's really important that artists, if they want to, they shouldn't have they don't have to, but if they want to, speak out and tell us their opinion. She was supposed to perform with Gergiev in 2014 in Carnegie Hall, and she said no. And you know what? I praise her for that, because she did perform with him in 2004 in the production of Salome at the Metropolitan Opera, and she was scheduled for this concert with in Carnegie Hall. But the minute that they invaded Crimea, she's been very consistent with the way that she's about this. And you know what? I think that it's great that an artist that she
I
just
would push back a little on the general statement of Russians don't belong on the world stage. Obviously, there is I think there definitely is a general feeling because of the injustice that's happening. But I do think that to generalize it to everyone, every Russian artist, because there's a lot of Russian artists that have spoken out. Some of them have left the country.
right,
It's not every Russian artist. So I think it is. She takes it, in my view, she takes it a little too far. I do think I find it rather comical that I mean, and humorous, and I mean, she's using a platform. She's a well-known artist. People know who she is. And so she's using that platform to kind of amplify her worldview and bring attention to the situation. Like you said, she's been very consistent, and it is entertaining. We do see a trend of a lot of artists taking to social media sometimes to be very unfiltered, sometimes taking it too far. You can make the argument that she takes it too far in this one, but nonetheless, with this whole Valerie Gergiev situation, with the way that the Italians embarrass themselves on the world stage with this whole situation, I do think that this is an interesting way to kind of put a button on this topic. All right, so that's enough about controversies and canceled productions and negative news, right? So we want to jump into a new segment that we're going to present, and I think we're going to try and maintain it every episode, which is what we're gonna call the opera of the month. And what we're hoping to do here is we're gonna talk about an opera that either we're gonna be seeing soon or that's celebrating a special anniversary, and we're just gonna talk about our experience with it. So, Fran, what is the opera of this month?
this month's opera is Puccini's Tosca, and the reason why is because I'm about to see it in the Teatro La Fenice in Venice in September with Chiara Isoton. And so I thought we would just start with this because this is an opera that is coming up, and it's one that we have a history with. I think we've seen
Yes,
a lot of performance of this work, and it's quite an interesting work that it's personally one of my favorite Puccini works.
for
I wouldn't say
sure.
it's my favorite, but as I've grown to see it more and more, I've started to really love certain aspects more than I used to, for
Yeah,
sure.
no, Puccini's Tosca is definitely it's a really special work. I think I mean, it's a political thriller. It's been described as a Hitchcockian thriller, which, me and you both love Alfred Hitchcock's films, and I
Yep.
definitely think it's a fascinating I think it's a great description of it. I think Act Two of that opera is just one of the greatest operatic sequences of
Yeah,
all
for
time.
sure.
It's just the way that the tension builds in that opera is unlike anything else. I don't think anything else quite matches it. Maybe the riddle scene in Turandot comes close at times, and
No.
there's moments in other operas that have it, but I think in this particular opera, it's so good. I mean, the way that the music ratchets it up, the way that the soprano's voice has to soar over and increasingly I mean, everything about it is just so insanely
Yep.
cathartic, and then of course to end it all with an assassination or a murder is just a cherry on top. The
Yes.
murder of the villainous character, right?
Well, all three characters end up dying.
Right, but I'm talking about Act Two specifically,
Yes,
because
of course, of course, of course.
Act Two for me is just dramatic perfection. But so I think our first time we've ever saw Tosca was obviously at the Met.
Yeah, it was.
And
We didn't see it together.
no, we didn't, but we saw the same singer.
Yeah, and the same production. It was the Franco Zeffirelli production at the Met, and it was Maria Guleghina. I think you saw Salvatore Liscitra.
Yes,
I
I did.
saw Maria Guleghina with Samuel Raimi. And it was a performance that I have vague memories of. I will remember that I did leave the production a little bit disappointed because it wasn't Samuel Raimi's best moment at the
Mm,
Met, in my opinion. And I remember her. I remember the red dress. It's an iconic red dress, and of course, there's the video recording with Blasio Domingo and Hildegard Behrens. But I do remember that red dress. I do remember Maria Gulegina's infectious acting, because she was an incredible actress and an incredible performer. We've seen other things with her, and I think one of the most insightful things about her is that she was just this amazing stage
yeah.
presence and huge voice, very good
Yeah. I
voice.
remember that. I remember that. I do remember Salvatore Di Chitra,
Yeah,
especially in that he was wonderful. It was, this was obviously very early on in our operatic journey. So,
yeah,
Di Chitra at that moment in time was one of the big stars before, unfortunately, he had his accident and passed. And then he was one of my favorite singers in that moment. And
yeah,
I really remember him and Guregina having incredible chemistry together
yeah.
on stage.
Well, they
Um,
started together.
yeah.
They loved each other.
I don't, it's kind of crazy to say this, and it's probably blasphemy for a lot of people, but I don't remember the Zeffirelli production as well as I thought I did, because obviously I've seen so many productions of the recent things and those kind of take over what
Right.
you think about it. But like going back and revisiting clips of the recording that you mentioned, like I actually realized that I don't remember it as well as I hoped. And then, it's crazy because I don't think we saw that many performances of that production because
I
soon
only saw
after.
one performance of that production, because after that it was the 2009 production by Luc Bondi, and I remember we didn't see the first cast, which was Carita Matila and Marcelo Alvarez.
Marcelo Alvarez, yeah.
Um, that production was famous. That opening night was famously booed. We saw the second cast, which was in the spring, and that was Jonas Kaufmann, Patricia Rachette, and Bryn Tervel. And what was amazing about that evening was that they did not follow any of Luc Bondi's direction. They did whatever they wanted. The production, I'm sorry, and, rest in peace, Luc Bondi. He was good at. His Don Carlo production is quite good. But that production was not something that I wanted to ever see again. And actually, fate would have it that I never saw that production again. You did, because you did see the Angela Garrigue performance.
Yes,
I was on a film shoot, unfortunately, so I couldn't get to see
I
her
did,
interpretation.
and I think that was. I don't remember if I saw her again after that.
No, because she
Um,
she didn't come back.
yeah, I mean, she was great. That was a great night. She was wonderful. Yeah, that was another production that, quite frankly, yeah, the Patricia Racette and Jonas Kaufman and Brent Tervel performance was so special because I felt like they transcended
Yeah,
the staging. They moved beyond it and they just kind of played the characters in such with such specificity, and with such intention in what they wanted to do on stage that
yeah.
the production was irrelevant. It was just, it was it felt like cardboard cutouts.
I would
Um,
call it the IKEA production, to be honest with you.
I think you're making you're underselling IKEA a little bit. But I mean, to be fair, the production was not particularly attractive, and it often did feel like it felt unfinished, to be honest, like visually speaking. Um, and then after that, like I think again, I saw the Angela Giorgio. We didn't really go to Tosca often when that
No,
production
I
was on
didn't. I
stage.
refused to go see Tosca with that staging. I mean, to be honest with you, after seeing that, I said I'm not seeing Tosca again. And maybe I did miss some of the people that did sing, because Sandra Aronofsky did perform it and Patricia Rachette did revive it as well.
With alla,
But
yeah.
I was happy that Sandra Aronofsky has come back to do Tosca, and we've been able to see some really amazing
Yeah,
performances by her.
she's been. I mean, we've seen her twice, both times with Brian
Yeah,
Jade.
hmm
And she's incredible.
yeah,
In that role especially because her voice is just so electric and so massive.
yeah,
That again, Act Two, she's just electrifying in Act Two, and we just saw her earlier in January.
yeah.
Those performances were sold out. They were some of the best performances of this past season.
Electrifying, I
We
must
didn't
say.
mention it. We didn't mention it in our first episode, but she
We
was
didn't.
she was an incredible Tosca this past season.
She
That
was.
was that was incredible. And then she did that a couple of years ago. I saw that performance as well. With the new production by Sir David McVicker, which
Yeah.
we didn't get off to a very auspicious start with.
No, we did not. It was quite hilarious because we did. get a chance to see some of the dress rehearsals. And I remember seeing some of the dress rehearsals, and it was not necessarily the most uh,
Listen,
interesting of productions. Of course, famously, this was supposed to be a completely different cast. We were supposed to see Jonas Kaufman, Christina Polias, and Bryn Tervo, and Anders Nielsen's, and all four of them ended up not doing the production for what reasons there were behind the scenes. And it ended up being Sonia Yoncheva, Vittorio Rigolo, Željko Lucic, and who was the conductor? I cannot remember.
Emmanuel Villon.
Emmanuel Villon,
How
sorry.
could you forget it? We have a big story with him. Yeah, and I wrote the review for that opening
Yeah,
performance, or was it the second performance? Because we didn't
it was
go
the
opening
second
night.
performance, we didn't go over
I wrote a very scathing review of that performance because we did not like it. We
No.
both went together and we were both very disappointed and dissatisfied with how sloppy it felt, the staging especially.
Yeah, it just also
And
felt very
musically
anticlimactic.
too, right?
Yeah.
And I wrote this review, and a few days later I got an email from Emmanuel Villon, who was like, I don't like your review. I disagree with it. Let's have lunch and talk about it. That's we've over the years received emails from people who don't like our reviews. I mean, we can go back to 2017. The first negative review we ever wrote was in Aida from Hungary, and
Yeah.
you received an email that was borderline criminal in terms of how it threatened you and threatened us, and the kind of language that was employed. It was very disheartening, especially when you're starting a publication, to hear in
Right.
2017, where you're still, relatively inexperienced with running a company or website, to hear someone threaten you with,
Right.
violence because of a review that you wrote. And granted, the review was pretty negative.
Yeah, I'm not sure I would
Um,
write a review like that anymore. But yeah.
but and then after that, over the years, we've had other people come, and we've, some artists will write to us and they will tell us they disagree. Sometimes people are fine. They're
Yeah.
they're they're kind about it. Sometimes people are distasteful about it too. Like, we've had some artists reach out to us, and really, again, bullying is a fair just characterization of it.
Yeah.
But Emmanuel Villon was the first time that we received an email after a negative review, and the person was wanting to dialogue about it.
Yeah.
Wanted to actually, like, get to know the person who had basically talked negatively about their performance and their artistry. And so I met with Emmanuel Villon, and we had a very pleasant conversation about it. Um, and then he invited me to go see it again. And then I wrote a piece about,
The evolution.
interesting evolution and experience of seeing it again, and having seen the final performance of the run, and how it was different from the first. And obviously there's a lot of interesting questions about performing arts and what reviews mean or don't mean in the context of a run that's going to be 7 performances long, and you're only writing about one piece. But
Right.
that was I will never forget that. I will always be grateful to Emmanuel Villon for doing that, because I mean, obviously, me and you, it's not like we don't come from an artistic background. We have been musicians. We are
Right.
musicians. We're also filmmakers, so we know what it is to be on the other side and have to put out a product into the put out a piece of art into the world, and to be judged on it. We have received all kinds of reviews for our
We
films.
have.
So we know what that is like, but it is appreciative it was a learning moment for me to see how an artist engages with that and humanizes the person on the other side, because it's so easy for people to be like, oh, critics are garbage. Critics are wannabe failures. I've got reviews also, like after the Aida review from earlier this year, I got an email from someone who also decided that they would pick a bone with me because I didn't speak the way they wanted me to speak about their favorite artist. So Emmanuel Villon, that for me is one of the most incredible professional experiences I've ever had, of an artist writing to me after a negative review, and then allowing me the window to see into what they're thinking about, and then having an experience with, hey, this is evolving, see it
Right.
again. So
And I famously we were there at the same time. I was in Colombia and I was watching the HD performance, and
yes,
you were in the theater. And so it was interesting to see actually the evolution of that production. Now, I
yeah,
won't say that it was my favorite performance of that Tosca. I will say that I did get to see, or did well, I didn't see it live, but I did see the Arena di Verona performance that Sonia Yoncheva and Vittorio Golo did a few years back after this Tosca. And I can tell you that it was very clear that they were just starting out with these roles at the Met. And then when they were in Verona, they had a very clear understanding of their role, and they had a clear understanding of their interpretation by the time they did it in Verona. I think it was 2 years ago. So that's great to see that there's like these recordings of the earlier versions, and now there's this recording that just was released on DVD, and we see a maturity in their interpretation. And especially because Yoncheva has matured as an artist, and she's a much more compelling artist now than she was a few years back, and that just happens for any artist who's growing.
One of the most interesting performances of this Tosca production at the Met that I saw in recent years has to be the Roberto Alagna Alexander Kurzak pairing,
Yeah,
because they were both phenomenal,
yeah,
and they obviously had very explicit chemistry. The challenge of that performance was Yannick Nézet-Séguin in the pit, and I know I've been very critical of him. I'm often very critical of him, especially in classic repertory. But what was particularly striking was how slow, like molasses, this Tosca felt,
yeah.
and how it often felt you could feel them kind of not gelling with the artist. Like the artist wanted to move forward, and he kept trying to pull it back, and it was so. This was the one time where I felt Tosca was lacking in dramatic stakes and tension because it was so
Well,
slow. That for
Well,
me was one.
he's conducted multiple times. He conducted Lisa Davidson and Freddie Di Tommaso. He's conducted the Sandra Radonowski and Brian Jade, and I've seen those performances, and I've heard how slow it gets, and it just becomes extremely boring, in my opinion. It doesn't really it lacks drive, and I think Tosca is one of those works that has this drive and this forward
Definitely
movement.
benefits from propulsion and movement.
And
Um,
and that's one of the performances that had that drive and propulsion. I think also just due to the fact that they were reviving the production, barely had any rehearsal. Was the when Netrebko did it with Yusuf Avasov, which is his breakout, and Mikhail Volé, and that was one of those performances
yeah.
where the conductor and the soprano and the tenor, they were all in the same place. And one of the other things that it did benefit was I have always had issues with some of Sir David McVicker's direction, and they just kind of threw away a lot of things and did whatever they wanted. And that was the same thing that Sandra Radvanovsky and Brian Jade just did with this last interpretation that they did in January, where they kind of just well, they kept some of the things that he did because you can't get rid of everything, but they also just experimented with the staging because just like I have issues with some of the blocking, Sir David McVicker also does give a lot of freedom in this production for the artist to experiment and to be able to do a lot of different things with it.
Any other memorable Tosca performances, anecdotes, events?
Well, I think with Tosca, we've also heard a lot of recordings of Tosca, so that's something that, over the years when it was interesting when we used to go to college, we used to go in our car and listen to the performance, the opera that we were going to see, and I think we listened to a lot of recordings that my dad had, and of course, Maria Callas's Tosca will always be
It's one of my
the,
favorite opera performances
it's
ever
one of them,
in
yeah, exactly. It's
recordings.
going to be always there,
It's a
and
cliche, but I mean,
yeah.
it's a legendary recording for a reason. So
It is. It is a legendary recording, and I think it's probably the recording that I remember most of it. And I've tried to listen to other people do it. Of course, Eva Marton was one of the other Toscas that I remember seeing on a video recording from Verona, actually, that my dad one day on a Sunday morning put on, and I watched through, and I just love that recording. So that's one of the ones that stick out for me when I'm thinking about Tosca as well.
yeah. So so what's going next? What do you have coming up? What are some operas that you're seeing in the next couple of weeks? Fill us in.
So I'm going to Teatro La Fenice to see Tosca, as I had said, and then I'll be going to Zurich at the beginning or the middle of September to see De Rosenkavalier with Diana Damrau and a recital of Elena Garancia. We'll also be seeing Macbeth and La Sonambula at the Teatro Nuovo, which would be really interesting because I do love to hear how they try to bring these works in a stylistic period. So I'll be very, very curious to see what's done with that.
And we'll also be seeing the Notte di Figaro at Teatro Grattacielo as well.
Yes.
So I mean, we're slowly getting back into opera performances and productions coming up. So it's gonna be exciting. Probably our next episode, we're gonna start like looking ahead to the fall of 2025 as we prepare for the new season. It's been great chatting. Um,
Yes.
I'm really looking forward to continuing this journey and evolving it. And we want to thank everyone that has tuned in. Please Check out the news. Keep yourself updated on operawire.com. You can also check our social media channels.
On Facebook, X, and Threads, of course, on LinkedIn, and of course on YouTube, where this podcast will be on.
Yes. So thank you very much. We will see you at the opera.
Thank you.